Mike DeCorte here with AWS Airbar. In this video, I'm going to illustrate how to replace the primary drive belt on an AWS system. The procedure should take approximately 1 hour with any experience. The first step in this procedure, we're going to remove the complete fan assembly. It's just much easier if we get it out of the way first. We're going to want to remove the elbow, or depending on the model, the flex hose directly from the fan outlet. We're also going to want to disconnect the electrical harness. The next step, we're going to want to disengage the secondary tensioner spring, and while we're at it, we're going to remove the primary spring as well. Using a 5/8 socket, with the tension removed, we're going to remove the secondary drive belt. While we're at it, we're going to spin the fan over. Just check, make sure that the bearings are good. They are a sealed bearing, really not serviceable. We're going to remove the U-bolt closest to the fan first. Followed by the second U-bolt. We're going to want to support the fan while we remove the nuts from that U-bolt, and then just lift it out of the way. The next step, we're going to remove both idler assemblies from the chassis. We're going to set the idler aside. And I find it a good practice to reassemble the nuts on the bolts, or to stick them in a blank hole in the frame for safekeeping. To remove this right-hand bushing, you'll need to align the bolt with a hole in the pulley. And there again, store these bushings for safekeeping and set the components aside. Next step we're going to want to do is remove this shield. Please ensure this shield gets replaced back onto the machine. It keeps stones and debris that fly off your transport tires from getting inside the belt here. In a typical procedure, we would simply remove this bearing and this bearing from the shaft and slide the shaft, the secondary shaft, out through the hole here, and the primary shaft out through the bottom of the chassis. But we're going to go ahead and pretend that these bearings are seized to the shaft. So what we're going to have to do is remove this frame rail without disturbing those bearings. To do that, we're going to have to remove the top bracket, these two face plates, and the spacers joining the two frame halves together. and we're in place. To remove the belt, we're going to want to keep it firmly on track as we roll it off the top pulley. To reinstall the belt, fit it onto the bottom sheave, then pull it up onto the secondary drive. Now that we've reinstalled the belt, we're going to tilt this shaft back to make installing our frame easier. We're going to slide on the bottom first. Placing the secondary shaft bearing in through the access hole in the frame and clicking on there against the shaft, and we're in place. Now that we've got our frame rail in place, we're going to go ahead and start assembling everything that we've previously taken apart. We're going to leave all the hardware loose until everything is in place. We're going to go ahead and install the top bracket now. All of the bolts must be from the inside out. This top bracket sits down flush with the top if you've got a 19-inch pulley. If you have a 14-inch pulley, it will be raised up 1 1/4 inches. There's a second set of holes here. The shield support goes on the pulley side to the back. And as I said, the bolt heads to the inside of the frame. Next, we're going to install the 2 frame plates, one up top and one down below here. Then we're going to assemble our 2 U-bolts. Now that everything has been loosely put back together, we're going to start tightening hardware, starting with the 3 spacer bolts, followed by the top bracket, the 2 frame plates. Lastly will be the U-bolts, and then we will tighten the flanges of all 4 bearings. With the 3 spacers tight, we want to ensure that our hook is tight to the beam and that the frame is also tight to the beam. Next, we're going to do the top bracket and the frame plates.
We're going to take a U-bolt.
Before we tighten the 4 bearing flanges, we want to just roll the system over, ensure that there's no drag and no binding, no bearing noise. Then we're going to go ahead, we're going to tighten all 4 bearing flanges. The bearing flanges do not need to be overly tight. But do a go around and give them a second test just to make sure you didn't miss any. Check the alignment of the pulleys, ensure that they're all still in good order. Then we're ready to put the fan back on. Place the fan assembly up in place and install your U-bolt. Prior to tightening the U-bolts, you want to see where the marks are as far as rotation of the fan. You want the outlet to line up with your hose or your elbow. You also want this fan plate tight against the frame stop here. That will ensure that your pulleys are aligned. You can roll this secondary belt on. With the fan in place, we can install our elbow or flex hose. As well as connecting our actuator harness. At this point, we're going to install our 2 idler assemblies. The primary idler, remember that the bolt heads go towards the fan side. There's a slight offset in the center point. We remove our bushings that we safely stowed here. And fit the idler into place. The secondary idler is installed in the same fashion as the first, using the 2 bushings and 3/8 bolts previously removed. Prior to tightening up the pivot bushings, we want to just start the bolts and the springs. So that the idlers are in place, then we tighten the hardware. we want to be careful not to over tighten the idler bushings, as it will crush the bronze bushing. It's good practice to apply a thin coat of anti-seize or grease to these threads to ensure longevity and ease of adjustment down the road. We're going to go ahead and tension up the idler springs. We're going to adjust so we can slide a dime easily between the coils of the spring. With a new belt installation, we want to increase that dimension to 1/4 to allow a little run-in for the first 15 hours. Then we're going to lock the jam nut against the spring. To ensure that bolt is secure. With our drive belt system completely reassembled, our fan installed, we're going to install this shield on the frame side. Once you have the drive fully reassembled, we're going to want to give each bearing a couple of shots of grease, lubricate our PTO shaft as well. Then we're going to replace the drive shield, run it at full throttle for 5 minutes, turn off the engine, wait for everything to stop, and then feel our belts, our pulleys, our bearings, and ensure that there's no heating or signs of slippage. We're also going to recheck our belt tension. And that concludes R&R primary belt.